I'm Alex.
And I'm Brennan, and we are talking about today on our Guide to the Galaxy our attitudes in the fandom and how we should present and maybe carry ourselves.
Yeah. And there is quite a few different attitudes in the fandom. If you've been in it long enough, you realize.
Indeed, there's a whole plethora of people spread out across a wide variety of opinions and how they present themselves.
Yeah, ranging from the Matt Wilkins and Christopher Nelsons to the OG Star Wars and Ryan Kennels.
And open airlock policies, right?
Yeah, and people in between. People
Yes.
new canon, people who despise it, people who like both, people who are indifferent. A whole bunch of different opinions and varieties within the EU fandom.
Absolutely. I guess we'll be talking about how we think we should carry ourselves and
Yeah,
the attitudes that we should have as a fandom.
absolutely. Brendan, what do you think is the best way for yourself to look when you're discussing stuff in the fandom, as a voice in the fandom?
I think it's always quite interesting because it might be a fine balance. If you're too
Yeah.
accepting and too let's let them walk all over us, the broader Disney canon people, you're presenting yourself in, I would argue, a sort of weak way, where they're walking all over you, and you're not carrying yourself in a strong enough way to be able to explain your side, perhaps, back to them. But at the same time, you have to put respect at the forefront of everything that you do when discussing these things in the fandom, because you don't want to present your side of the fandom in a negative light. That's going to detract from everything you're trying to do.
Absolutely, and I think I think it's weird for us because we've gotten to a point where we're not to prop ourselves up or anything, but we're not just like random people on the internet anymore.
Yeah, sure.
And so with that comes a responsibility that you don't have if you're just a typical commenter on a YouTube video.
Absolutely, you're setting an example for how others will discuss. The Matt Wilkins and Christopher Nelsons and OG Star Warses and Ryan Kinnels, who you already mentioned, they have a huge following. Larger
Absolutely.
obviously than either of ours, and they've set an example. Whichever way they fall on how they carry themselves, they have set an example that others follow.
Yeah, and I think, there's people that we're friends with that may have strong opinions about certain YouTubers within the fandom. Whether or not they think they're actually EU fans because they talk about Disney canon or hate on Disney canon or whatever. For me, the best way to go about being a voice in the fandom is more taking the Christopher Nelson and the Matt Wilkins approach, where you just don't care about canon and you just talk about what you love, which is the expanded universe, and try to present a positive attitude and voice in the fandom, while of course when slander is shown toward the EU, being willing to fight back and talk back against it.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and that's a point that many of us need to adhere to more, perhaps. I get upset when people start talking about Disney canon in any sort of positive light, any way that it's better than the EU. That gets my blood boiling, so to speak.
Yeah.
I've got to be more careful and follow the Chris Nelsons and the Matt Wilkins of, you guys can talk about that. I'm going to ignore it and talk about what I like. We all need to be better at that.
Yeah. And it's really easy when you're on the internet to we are on the other side as well, and it's important to remember that people are free to their opinions. So if they think that Disney Star Wars is better, that's great. I'm happy that brings you happiness. I'm going to stick to the thing I love. But also when they start saying things that are just blatantly untrue, to be like, look, like what you like, but you can't be making lies about the expanded universe. Like, that's just false. The EU was canon. Stop saying it's not.
That's very true. See, so we should be able to say, hey, I'm glad you like what you like. Matt Wilkins says that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
We can say, we're glad that you like it. Just stop slandering our side while you're enjoying your side. We could all be more civil. It's not just one side that could be more civil. Both sides have to be able to make the first step to being civil.
Got to be able to make respect back. Respect is, shown both ways.
It's a two-way street.
Yeah, but then there's also some that does hurt the fandom, and to some extent, I agree. I think, and this isn't to hate on anybody who does do that. All the power to them. That's their right. It's their channel. They can do as they please. I do think only if you actually watch the Disney stuff or read the Disney stuff should you be critiquing it, because then you spent time, kind of like Christopher Nelson mentioned me in the live streams he was doing with Dylan of the history of the EU fandom, and how I read the Bounty Hunter Wars. I spent that time, so I have a right to hate on it because I gave it a chance.
Absolutely.
In the new stuff, and they're just bashing it every chance they get. Does that really help the fandom? Does that really make Lucasfilm see us EU fans in a positive light if the biggest, most popular ones aren't really even discussing the EU? They're just talking about how much the new canon sucks. And so I think there's a balance there to be made.
There's definitely a balance between praising what you enjoy and critiquing what you dislike. You have a right to do both, but if you do only one and never do any of the other, it might be better to have a healthy balance. A balance that's more towards the positive side of things is always going to be for the best. You always want to, if you're going to skew one way, you want to skew more positive than negative.
Yeah, because there's already a lot of negativity in the world. So
absolutely,
I still try to be really hard because I had almost nothing to say, but I tried to find some things, better than just being a negative man all the time.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's a fractured fan base, and it just seems too great a gap to heal at times.
Yeah, so and speaking of fractured fan bases, there's also within the fandom, it's interesting because you'll find people who I've actually heard people say like, oh, the EU stopped after Hand of Thrawn because they don't like the darkness that came with New Jedi Order and everything, because they don't count New Jedi Order as part of their canon. But then you also have people that count New Jedi Order and don't count anything afterwards. And you even have people arguing it's good that within the EU fandom that only like the EU will say like, well, it's a good thing that the EU ended because it was becoming garbage anyway, and we shouldn't have it continued. And I think that's also hurtful to the movement, because I think a good portion of the EU fandom wants more stories. And if Lucasfilm is hearing, about, oh, well, the EU fans are divided anyway on if they even want more stories, I feel like that will hurt ever getting more.
I don't understand why more EU could ever be considered a bad thing. Now, if it's done poorly, in bad taste, and contradicts pre-established lore, sure, you can make a case that's a bad thing, clearly. But I don't see how anyone could be against any more EU being produced. I only see this as a positive thing. It's hard to imagine anyone could be against this.
Yeah, but of course we also like all eras of Star Wars, maybe some more than others. But for those who feel like the universe is already dying after New Jedi Order, I could see why they would say, well, why would, even if it was, within continuity and everything, we didn't like the story that was being given to us after New Jedi Order, so why would we want more of that?
Well, I think if you think about it, it's almost a decade now, right, since the EU was wrapping up. It's been 8 years now. That's a long time.
2 more years will be a decade. Yeah.
Yeah, that's going to be a long time for the writers to come back to it and think about it. It won't necessarily be the same. I would think if the EU would continue, there would be different writers involved, perhaps. And sure, they'd continue the plot lines, but they'd probably have very different takes on everything that was going on. So they probably would take the story down a different road than originally would have been intended. And, I imagine they'd stay in continuity. And if referencing the parts of the EU that certain people don't like, Legacy of the Force and Dark Nest, and Fate of the Jedi primarily, if referencing that makes it bad, I don't know how that can make it bad. Because if they come out with new EU by new authors, the story is not going to be originally where it would have gone, Fate of the Jedi. It'll have changed with the time. So it will reference that, but they're going to take the story a different place, right? So I still feel like those fans should think about like how it's going to go. Different people being involved. The past. Yeah,
that might have the same opinion as them. It depends on who's writing.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of factors to think about.
Yeah. Also, we could finally get some stories that we never got conclusions for, like the Force Unleashed 3, which would be really cool because Force Unleashed 2 ends with Vader captured, and there's no conclusion to that. And I think that'd be a very important step in if we would just all speak more positively about the EU and just praise it. Perhaps one day Lucasfilm. Right now it doesn't seem like it, but maybe one day we could finally start getting more stories and get conclusions of stuff that was left up in the air.
That's very true. That clone, we don't know what happened to that clone. It's such an open book. To get it closed would be great. And presenting ourselves as a positive, respectful, unified community is a huge step in getting more.
Absolutely.
At that point, the analogy, the ball is in their court, could be used. We've done everything we can. We've petitioned. We've been respectful. We've unified in what we want. It's up to them at that point, right? It's out of our hands, and we've done everything we can.
Yeah, but what we can always do, no matter what happens with the expanding universe, is as a fandom to continue to celebrate the universe that has seemingly been forgotten, and to keep talking about it for years to come. Or so that even if we don't get new stories, we can maybe bring new people into the universe and kind of experience it anew through their eyes. Kind of like with a new YouTuber, Liam.
Yeah, see, Spider is new to the EU within the past year. He's the youngest EU fan that I've thus far encountered. I myself am a young EU fan. And as long as younger fans care about the EU, it's never going to die, right? As long as we're able to pass it to the next generation, then the next generation, and then the next generation thereafter, the EU's not going to die. We'll continue talking about it, continue attracting new fans to it, continue talking about it in a positive way, and continue loving it. The EU won't die out that way. And as long as it's not died out and there's still a fan base, there's always a possibility, however small, that it could continue. As we continue to love it and nurture it despite it feeling dead, it keeps the door open on future stories.
Absolutely. I think that about wraps it up for what we wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I would say so.
Well, yeah, thanks everybody for watching. And join us as we continue to discuss other things like analysis of stuff, rankings of stuff, debates of stuff, and defenses of stuff like Legacy of the Force. But yeah.
Indeed, and the topic that we had written down for the next topic specifically was cool expanded universe connections. That could change, but that's what we were thinking of doing next. So we hope you will join us then.
Absolutely. Till next time.
Until next time.